So me, as a divorced woman in her 40s with no children and living with 5 cats, I would be labeled as a spinster.
So why wouldn't I want to live in the 50s?
You're probably wondering, what is this lady on about? She has a vintage style. She makes videos about the 50s, and she now says that she doesn't want to live in the 50s. And I understand that it may come across as an oxymoron. It is oxymoron, not oxymoron. And that is the correct intonation of this Greek word. So yeah, it may come across as an oxymoron, but let me explain. One of the most common assumptions for us that dress vintage is that we would love to live in that era, but that can be further from the truth. Yes, sorry, what? What was a woman's role in the 1950s? Ah, I'm so sorry. What was a woman's role in the 1950s? Well, she, she was basically raised to be a good housewife, to raise children, to be happy with all that. A woman would almost never be urged to study, follow her dreams and career. Women would be expected to stop working if they ever did, just because they got married, because their role would be in the house, raising their children and tending to their husband. They would usually get married around their early 20s, and if that didn't happen, then it was a problem. Then you would probably be left on the shelf. So me, I would be labeled as a spinster or a divorcee at best, which was how they called divorced women. Of course, men weren't called divorcees, they were just called men, probably eligible still. And of course, it was always a woman's fault for ruining her marriage. The stigma was always on her because she wasn't a good wife, because she pushed her husband away, because she didn't look pretty for her husband. So, yeah, she was faulty.
And I wouldn't give it back, even being with Glenn's father.
Is that your ex-husband?
Yes.
As you can understand, I wouldn't want to be called that or anything like that. Who would? Or I wouldn't want the society to dictate if I get married or if I have children and how many children I have and if I'm able to study or not. Women weren't really allowed to study back then, and if they did face many difficulties because they were surrounded by men, and men, they would make their lives very, very difficult. For some of them that did study and become scientists or professors or doctors or anything like that, they would be definitely underpaid in regards to their male colleagues. Some women were indeed working as secretaries, but they were expected to stop working once they got married, or they would be urged to go and work at a place where they would find a good husband.
They're on the cover of Life magazine.
Yes, so the face like that, you'll find a husband in a couple of months.
People tend to romanticize the 50s or in general some past eras, and that is mainly because it is portrayed by media or films as if things were ideal back then, things were beautiful and romantic and everything's big and span. And I do want to make a disclaimer that I'm talking about most people. I'm talking about the majority of the society. I'm talking about the general consensus of that time. There were definitely exceptions to the rule. There were definitely women that would rebel and go against what society would dictate to them, but their lives were made very, very difficult. And that is not a way to live. You should be able to live freely, pursue your dreams and your goals, and to choose for yourself what you want to do. Because I'm not saying that being a wife or a mother is a bad thing. I'm just saying that it should be your choice, not the choice of society. You see, women were not supposed to have an opinion. They might be a little bit educated just to be able to hold a conversation at a social gathering. They shouldn't be really opinionated. That would be a problem. I would like to show you some of the really misogynistic and sexist ads of the 1950s.
Oh my gosh, this ketchup bottle is so easy to open, even a stupid woman can do it. And this one is about women belonging in the kitchen, blatantly stating that they should just cook their husbands a nice meal. And what about this one? Show her it's a man's world. And look at how she's kneeling, this way promoting the image of the submissive woman. And this one is the worst of all. I seriously feel like vomiting looking at this ad promoting domestic violence.
Imagine if these ads would come out today. Like, imagine the backlash the companies would have, and very fairly, I should add. So let's talk about something else. What about segregation? Segregation was a big thing in the 50s. It basically meant that black people were not allowed to mingle with whites unless they were their servants. They wouldn't be even allowed to use the toilet.
Tell Raleigh every penny he spends on a college bathroom, he'll get back in spades when y'all sell. Ugh, it's just plain dangerous. They carry different diseases than we do.
There was separate hospitals, like they weren't allowed in stores that were for white people. There were specific seats on the bus for black people, and they were definitely underpaid. The way black people were treated back then is just appalling. It's just disgusting. And of course, as a white woman, I have the privilege of not knowing how it is to be a black person today or how it would be to be a black person back then. But still, even from my point of view, from the point of view of a black person who believes in equality and justice, I just hate that about the 50s. And it wouldn't be a society that I would want to live in. And this brings me to another reason why the 50s society was very problematic, and that was homophobia. I found an interview from a gentleman that was talking about how it is to be a gay man in the 50s.
You had to keep everything a secret. Everything had to be a secret all the time. For those people who fit all those categories, it was the land of the free. The rest of us, you better know it was the home of the brave.
It says it all, really says it all. So I would urge you to watch the whole interview. What he says is really, really interesting. So yeah, as you heard him say, it was really awful to be gay in the 50s. People weren't even allowed to express their true identities. They would be forced to have hormonal therapies. They would be forced to have electroshock treatment. It was illegal. It was illegal to be with a person of the same sex. So if you were caught, you would be put to jail. All gay people were ostracized. They wouldn't be allowed to live their lives freely and true to themselves. They would have to pretend all the time. They would have to live a lie. Some of them would get married and have children and just pretend all the time, which of course would make them and their wives miserable. And no one should be forced to live in a lie. No one should be forced to pretend to be something else just because society cannot bear it, just because society is not ready for it. Everyone should be free to live as they wish, as long as they're not hurting anyone, of course. And I'm just scraping the surface here, all these matters, because there's so much to read and learn and talk about. But I really wanted to share my opinions about this and just come out and say why most, if not all, vintage enthusiasts do not really have vintage values. We just love vintage style. We just love to dress in clothes of a certain era or in the style of a certain era. And yeah, we love the style. We love the aesthetics. We love the decor, the cars, the music. We wouldn't want all the bad things that were existing back then and that were making people's lives difficult. And no, I'm not trying to say that everything is perfect today. Not in the least. But we have come a long way, haven't we? We really have come a long way in many areas. Take medicine, for example. Yes, technology can be problematic, but it can also be very helpful. And when it comes to assumptions, you can't even imagine the things when I say we, people that dress vintage. Let me give you an example. So I was at a dating app, or was it Facebook? I can't really remember where it was. And there's a guy that texts me. It was literally his first message. I didn't know him. He goes, "Are you 100% vintage?" Well, I can imagine the wink. It would definitely go with a wink. And I'm like, in regards to my style? Yes. Why do you ask? He basically wanted to know, how do I say this? How my private parts were styled in a vintage way or a modern way. What that fluff is, what kind of a question is that for someone that you don't know and it's like the first question ever? Yeah, you can imagine that there are men that assume that because I love to dress vintage, I will have vintage values and I will want to be a good housewife for them and bring them their slippers and cook for them and wash their dirty underwear and be a good woman with no opinion whatsoever. And again, I'm not saying that taking care of your person is a bad thing, but all house chores should be shared. It's not only up to women to tend to house chores. We weren't born with that task. It was inflicted upon us.
Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the next one with some vintage sewing.